I mean, you could see cultures or societies exploding just like phenomena because they can't figure it out. And that brings us to the question that if I had kept looking for reason, somewhere, so I will miss all this that's going on. And I'm not happy to, I didn't know, by the way, I read from the 20th century Wittgenstein, and then there was the 17th century Zarekov, and it's clear to me that we're faced with a different century. So Wittgenstein is just as dated for me as Zarekov was. And I would just insist on a post-colonial.
Two final questions. Edward?
Thank you very much. I have a question, but before that, it's also based on this whole issue of relativism. And if we take, in terms of language or culture, within every language or culture, if we take this to be relative, in the sense that truth or falsehood or rightness or wrongness is culturally or language is contextual in terms of language or culture. I think I very much agree with you in that sense that reason itself is diverse, it's internally diverse, because what would be wrong or what would be right within, depending on the culture, it's we can assign reasons to them as to why, and it is accepted by that particular group of people. But I just want to ask a very basic and fundamental question on the issue of human rights. I mean, we talk about human rights and we explain it in so many ways and in diverse ways. When we take the fundamental or the basic, to me, which is the right to life, which I think that within every language or culture is respected, in the sense that when a child is born, that child is allowed to live, depending upon the kind of reasons that might be assigned, whether the child is deformed or something like that, in which some cultures will just kill the baby before he even take the first breath. How would you see that? Because I think that fundamentally the basic human right, which is the right to life, without which I think we can't talk about the others. Each and every language or culture kind of see this. So is this, how do we assign reason? And there might be diverse reasons, of course, in saying what life should be. But are we then not, are we then not escaping from relativism to kind of an objectivity, where we all see the right to life as the basic, without which we can talk about other rights, for instance?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I'll try to see if I understand it before I give it a shot. You're saying that the right to life is so fundamental and so non-negotiable because it's the condition for other rights.
Sure.
Therefore, you can't even see why anybody needs to raise any question that might evoke any kind of relativism on that, whether it's methodological or substantive. This is an absolute for you.
Exactly.
Question stopped.
Sure, because we can assign different reasons to that from within each culture or language as to why we accept that. And on that basis, I agree with you that reason itself is internally diverse. I agree. But then out of this diversity of reason, we come to a conclusion that right to life is important. And on that basis, are we not escaping from relativism to objectivity? That's my point.
That's a good question. That's also an interesting use of the word objectivity, because that's also different from, obviously, from objectivism, which whenever you add ism to something, it becomes like a movement again. But I can also see the various levels where we have this sort of instinctive commitment that life is good, objectively so, living, and then you say another level where you think of the alternatives, and then in the end you come back and you make a reaffirmation that resembles the beginning. But so I can see those levels of okay. I think where I'm not sure I agree with you is just the description of everyday lives or life in society. I'm not sure that it's interesting to use the word right to life, because right, I mean, that's a very historically loaded term, you know. In fact, Hannah Arendt, as you know, talks about, since you work in human rights, talks about the right to have rights. So obviously, you know, the groundworks that needs to be done there, but also, actually, in more cases than you realize, we do make exceptions to. They're rational ways. We call them sometimes judicial murder. We call them judicial execution. Sometimes you call them legal this. But there are many countries where you have situations where some, in fact, even when there's some kind of death, I mean, you go to court, you see all this, where reasons play against one another in a court situation, a very formal situation, you see people making gradations, whether this is murder or first degree, second degree, or manslaughter or intentional, unintentional. So I think we do assign, or if you go to court and say that you work in a company and negligence caused the company to make you harm your leg and you can't work anymore, and the court will calculate how many years are left in your life, how many working years, and say how much money they can award you for negligence or for loss of job. So I really think we rationally argue about life all the time, and sometimes, you know, give it the fullest room to flourish, other times to narrow it, you know, imprison a body or something. So I'm not really sure. I see the philosophical interest that you bring to bear, and I think it's very rich, but the description you give in terms of when you use right, I wish, and I'm sure, if this was a seminar situation, you have the room to do the kind of work on rights that I saw you do there on objectivity.
We have one final question.
I guess my question's going to be piggybacking on all that's been talked about. You mentioned Aristotle, and throughout the entire talk, I kept thinking of well, there seems to be a big R rationality, and there seems to be a small R rationality, you might want to call it, right? And then I started thinking of I don't know, Jürgen Habermas and I don't know, the deliberative democracy, right? So I start wondering if it's the case that that entire project relies on the conception of big R rationality, right? By which get together and right? But I think it's also I think the likes of Habermas, the deliberative Democrats, are also aware that there are well, maybe different conventions and reason giving and so forth, right? But nevertheless, they want to keep the gains of the Enlightenment. So I'm just wondering if you think that that project is doomed to failure, or perhaps that's too strong a way to put it.
Yeah. Does your question imply that the Enlightenment, capital E Enlightenment, translates to rationality, capital R rationality?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
In that case, it wouldn't seem. There seems to be a tension there.
Yeah, in my mind, there's a vast difference, and in this way, I think when we use capital E for Enlightenment, at least the way I read it, we're really talking about historical institutions. We're talking about movements. We're talking about people. We're talking about the encyclopedia, for example. We're talking about Kant says, what is Enlightenment? We're talking about the Berliner Schrift, you know, the journal. we're talking about Descartes, having done his